have got a special guest with us today. We have got Francesca, who is a leadership coach, public speaking coach, a mentor, a trainer, and an author, and so many other things that we'll let her tell us about. I'm very excited to hear more from her. But today we're going to be thinking a bit about spiritual hurt and abuse.
Yeah, that's right. But before we get into that very deep, serious subject, we have some ridiculous questions to ask you to get to know you a little bit. So first of all, what is your favourite biscuit?
It's got to be a bonbon, the chocolate bonbon biscuits.
A bonbon, that's it, yeah, good shout. Yep. Good shout. And would you say that you have a favourite social media platform?
Yeah, I think it's Instagram at the moment. I think the reels are great and I like how the stories are, so
nice.
I'm an Instagram girl.
But you spend a bit of time on LinkedIn as well?
Yes. Yeah, I do use LinkedIn and Facebook. It's almost like you've got to be on various platforms. But if I could choose, I'd stick with Instagram.
Yeah, fair enough. Do you have any favourite podcasts at all?
So I do like The Diary of a CEO by Stephen Bartlett. I think that's really informative. And then I listen to almost like a Christian affirmation podcast in the morning, like especially if I'm going on the train to London and it's really busy and stressful, or listening to some very calming, soothing voices.
Nice. I like that. And last of these intro questions is the most important one. Gourd or pomegranates?
Pomegranates.
Pomegranate all the way.
Absolutely.
I had some pomegranate juice yesterday in a very posh hotel and it was amazing. But because I didn't want to buy another drink, I made it last for as long as possible.
Cool. So thank you so much for being with us today, Francesca. Can you tell us a bit about your background? You've worn a number of different hats. How did you end up doing what you're doing now? Just tell us everything.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you the super short version. So when I went and did my undergraduate, I did it in psychology because I was determined to make a difference in the world through educational psychology. But then, like a lot of us, you graduate and you realise that life looks a little bit different. And so I ended up getting my first main job was in a local authority, working in the education services as an early years consultant. And so I was supporting, advising, guiding nursery practitioners and managers, and I really loved the job. But a turning point for me came when we did the Gallup's Strength Finder, and my top theme came out as a developer. And realising that I have a natural gifting and passion for helping other people, I went and did my master's in coaching and mentoring, set up my business, and then that's kind of brought me to where I am today, where I now deliver a range of coaching services as well as training and things.
That's really cool. I mean, we mentioned up front that one of the things that you talk about is spiritual abuse. So how does that link into that? Obviously, you mentioned psychology and working with a range of people, but how did that particular area of expertise come about?
Sure. Well, it definitely was not an area that I expected to find myself in. I always tell people that, when 2020 came around, I didn't put that on my vision board for the year of something that I would get into. But basically, I really felt inspired by God to share my story of being in a sort of a harmful, toxic church. And he gave me the title of the book. It was just such a strong impression that I really couldn't deny it. And so I spent a lot of lockdown writing and also gathering other people's stories to put into a book. And then when it was being published, again, I felt prompted I should be doing a coaching program. And I'm like, well, no, because when you've gone through harmful or hurtful things, you need therapy, which I think absolutely you do. But coaching and counselling together, the combination means you can get healed, but also you can move forward and make progress. And so then I developed a therapeutic coaching program. And so, being able to use some of my professional skills in more of a ministry space is how this works.
Interesting. And I mean, you and I know that I'm interested in that crossover between professional and ministry as well. And I guess that's happened quite a lot throughout your career by the sounds of it. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, there's a phrase that speaks about marketplace ministry and how actually wherever you are and whatever you do, if that's the corner of the world that you've been put in, that in essence is the place you are to minister, whether formally or informally, publicly or privately, we're there to make a difference.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So spiritual abuse as a phrase sort of sounds simple enough, but actually it can be quite difficult to define what it is or is not. Can you kind of explain a bit more about what it looks like? What we're talking about? Is it a specific kind of subset of abuse, or is there an element of the spiritual to any abuse that happens in a church setting?
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right, Hannah. It can be really hard to define, and people will have different definitions of it. So when we think about the categories of abuse in general, the verbal, emotional, and the other sorts of abuse, those things can happen in a spiritual environment. So in an environment of faith. And that could be a church or a mosque or a temple. But as a Christian, the context I speak about is in church. And so where somebody causes you harm, and the reason for that relationship is because you have a shared faith, whether they're your leader, your pastor, someone who you sing in the choir with, that is one of the things that makes it spiritual abuse. Some of the common types of spiritual abuse are going to be things such as manipulation and control, financial abuse, but also using the word of God, so the Bible and the name of God, out of context for different gains. Yeah. So that's kind of what we're talking about. It doesn't just happen from a leader to someone in the congregation. It can happen, between members of the congregation, between leaders. It doesn't have a certain look. It can happen in lots of different settings.
Yeah. Yeah, that was going to be one of my sort of questions of, is it always hierarchical like that?
No. So, you have some instances where, for example, let's say someone in the congregation will have found something out about the leader and then almost use that, like a bribery, or intimidate them because of information as well. Although I would say the majority of cases happen from a leader to someone who they lead, but it could also happen between leaders as well.
Yeah. And I guess there's a potential, when there's that power dynamics, there's always that potential then, like that increased likelihood of it, but that doesn't mean that it's exclusive. And
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when people come into our faith community, they come in often with their guards down, and they come in fully believing, fully accepting, and so then sometimes they're more susceptible or vulnerable to the messages that are being shared.
That's really interesting. I 100% agree with you that people are coming in with their guards down. But I wonder whether, not to just sort of make it too black and white, but when Christians are coming into a new church, whether we have more or less got our guards down. But actually, when people who aren't Christians are coming in for the first time and are maybe really nervous about it, yes, there can be that element of, oh, these are probably nice people, I can trust them. But I wonder whether in the culture we're in today, actually there's an element of people having their guards up too much. Whether that's because of just a hesitancy towards church, they're not used to it, whether it's because of like publicized cases of abuse. And I guess, do you have any advice on how we can combat that as well? It's not abuse specifically, but it's sort of like a gentle, softly warming people up sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard because there has to be, I think, wisdom and balance in everything. So you don't want to come in with guards up, because how do you build community and form relationships with the Christian community, and at the same time you don't want to come down with the guards down, whereby everything can happen. And so I think as church organizations, it's really important that we are safe environments and we're healthy environments. And so an element of transparency, I think, with relation to safeguarding and accountability, and letting people know leadership structures, and if they have a concern, who they can go to. But generally, from people who sit in the pews, let's say, I think being warm and being kind, but also being patient, because actually there's no other community where you would have such an immediate desire to connect with people, irrespective of where they come from, and you can know nothing about them, but because of the shared faith, we have loads in common. And at the same time, this is still someone who is a stranger. And so to be patient with people if they seem a little bit more reserved or a little bit less forthcoming, because they might not want to come and join you for coffee on a Tuesday at your house because you are a stranger. Whereas normally in Christian community, that is a very normal type of behaviour.
That's really good.
Without naming names of things that have happened, both recently and kind of historically, there was my observations of it. and I have to say I have kind of no experience of anything like this, but sort of my observations of reports that came back from incidences and situations has been, oh, well, that's just how that person is. They're the leader, that's their personality. They are like that. Now, it's very easy to say that in the moment and then go, oh, well, we didn't know that was happening, or kind of, be really shocked, because we were almost willfully blind to any situations. But sort of looking forward to the increase in safeguarding and protection for not just children, but adults, whether they are kind of explicitly vulnerable, but just sort of protection of everyone. Are there things that we can put in place in church settings that help anyone sort of notice and deal with abuse, either, as it happens or even before, so that, we can safeguard it, but also so that people feel comfortable and safe to call it out, or at least express a concern?
Yeah.
Because for various things recently, it was sort of, they couldn't share anything. And so, what can we do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I hear the hesitancy in even how to talk about it, because it is so hard. Because often what you find is people who perpetrate abuse in whatever format, they're often very charismatic, and they have big personalities, they're lovable, they're likable, and
good stuff happens. Like it's
they bring the
even
bums
on
in
black
the
and white.
seats.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, it is incredibly complex, because, in my own circumstance, I did have amazing experiences and life-changing experiences that were really healthy and wholesome, but also alongside some really, really harmful things. And so this is what makes it very, very complex as well. I think in church community, we can try and make it safer by having leadership structures that don't solely depend and rely on one person. That then almost becomes the name, the face, and everything rides on them. Because this is where people find it hard to raise a concern, because it's the one leader who is quite controlling or really influential. And additionally, I think leadership structures where it's not all family. Because again, if you've got, son and grandfather or brother or god family, how do you then raise a concern about somebody? Because people will jump to their immediate defense. So again, trying to have leadership structures in place that look like there's not too much close connection, so that people can think and really observe objectively. And then alongside that, I think having really great safeguarding policies in place, again using biblical principles of godly character and leadership, to be able to put that alongside the regulations of safeguarding that we have here in the UK as well. So those are some of the things I think that can be helpful. But it's really hard, and often what happens is, for those who are victims or survivors, they're almost groomed into this way or this relationship where they themselves don't see anything wrong. We think about the term love bombing, whereby somebody will come in and just be so kind and so loving and so giving, but there's an ulterior motive. So that wouldn't raise a concern ordinarily. But when it starts to be coupled with if you and because I and, all these other things, that makes it really challenging. So then how do you raise that concern when you yourself have been a beneficiary of someone's love?
Yeah. And I think you mentioned like the legality of safeguarding, and there are certain things that churches have to do and display in their policies and that sort of thing. Do you think that there's a danger, or do you see it happening often, where safeguarding is just treated as that sort of exercise, like a tick box sort of thing?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's almost, we do it, but we're not going to notice or have the hard conversations. So I think for some people, they haven't necessarily caused it to be a lived out reality, or made it part of the conversation, so that it's okay to talk about it, and it's also okay to raise a concern, just to put it on the table and have a discussion around it.
And another thing to pick up on what you said there was, mentioning about godly character in leadership, and I think there's a whole other conversation to be had in terms of what the characters we're looking for in a leader should be, because so often we're looking for those charismatic people who are going to be effective in what they're doing, and looking for results rather than character. But a lot of the time that is what it goes back to, and sometimes, you know, it's not always immediately obvious. But Marcus Hanisett published a book fairly recently called Powerful Leaders. I don't know if you read it at all, but it's really interesting, where he goes through the different stages along the spectrum of sort of good leadership to probably okay but slightly questionable, to all the way then to abuse. And it's really interesting and really difficult to draw those lines, isn't it? Because you can be asking something in the right way, but you can still have an ulterior motive, or you can ask it in the wrong way but still have a right motive. And ultimately we're dealing with people, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where the difference between what we call church hurt and spiritual abuse is. So we're all human, and therefore we're going to make mistakes, and we're going to hurt people just because we're human. And so, you know, we have to learn to take accountability and apologize and accept that, you know, people are going to tread on our toes, whether literally or in other ways. But then when we think about spiritual abuse, it's often more calculated, it's intentional, and it causes damage versus hurting somebody where we can kind of have a quick discussion and it can be resolved. Also, when we think about spiritual abuse, again, it's targeted. There is, it doesn't happen to everybody. There's a vulnerability in a lot of people that then causes that person to go through that. And it's incredibly hard. And you know, when I had my own, some of the things I'd gone through, I remember sharing with my family, and they couldn't believe it because they knew these people personally. Like, we've all sat down and had dinner together, you know, because the version of that person they saw was very different. So it's hard to believe something.
So when thinking about abuse, is there often an element where churches kind of don't want to deal with the icky situation of sort of whether it's something like, you know, even a smaller potential problem, it's not even actually a problem yet, but we avoid dealing with that smaller issue until it's too late, and actually they become very serious, you know, even legal kind of, you know, major concerns. You know, how do we guard against this, especially in a way that doesn't undermine the authority that God has given sort of within churches, but so that we aren't sort of just letting it wait until it's something serious?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that scenario does happen very often, sadly. And so I think, in the professional world, we have something called a professional curiosity, where we are open and more curious about why somebody would say something, because I appreciate there are cases where some people would make up something just to sabotage someone's character. But the majority of cases, to come forward and say something has happened or to raise a concern, especially when it's about you, is deeply vulnerable and hard. And I think we can help by actually believing people earlier rather than disregarding what they're saying by using professional curiosity. And so, you know, being willing to have the conversation to really figure out what, from their perspective, is happening, and to understand better, and also maybe to bring in other people, you know, more neutral people to give a different insight. Because when we're really close to a situation or an individual, it's almost like, you know, we're just seeing through this tunnel vision, and so we only see from our perspective and we don't see wider. So believing people is definitely a first step.
And thinking from the point of view of communications, obviously that's what we talk about all the time on the podcast. So whether we're thinking of how to reach new people or whether we're communicating with those who are already within the church, what can we be doing to be sensitive to the sort of things that we're talking about today? Is there anything that we need to avoid in how we're communicating?
Yeah, really good question. So when I moved to churches a couple of years ago because I relocated areas, and one of the first thing I noticed was from the front of church, there was when things were shared, it wasn't shared as a command. It was an invitation. For example, we'd love you to stand and raise your hands if you feel comfortable to do so, versus stand up, raise your hands in the air and worship God. Right. It's sometimes the subtle,
and that's going to be cultural as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Really cultural. But some of those change of language where people realize that they're allowed to make a choice for themselves is also really, really helpful, versus telling what to do, commanding what to do, again, in healthy churches. So even having this discussion, is what healthy church and healthy Christians can do. And so, I mean, you know, in other places I would be saying things such as, you know, don't be tying in a guaranteed promise or a reward with what you're saying because it's unscriptural, right? But again, most healthy churches wouldn't even do that anyway, such as, you know, if you give an offering today, God is going to bless you this week, right? Whereas in other church cultures and communities, those sentiments are said repeatedly. Yeah. So I think in communication, those things could be helpful. And then I think in general, the line could be included such as, you know, we want you to have a great experience. You're really welcome in our church and we're here to support you. If anything is worrying you or concerning you, please have a chat with so-and-so. So it's not a really, you know, hardcore safeguarding, you know, line, but it's just a reminder that if you do want to talk about anything, if you have any worries or concerns, we're here to listen to that. And we hope it would never happen, but it's just something just in case.
That's really helpful. And again, picking up on the church hurt versus abuse, I mean, it might be helpful just to define that a little bit more. I think what you said about it being really targeted is helpful.
Yeah.
But is there, how do we treat those two situations differently? Because church hurt is still very real and it hurts, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So I think if you think about a healthy family structure, in healthy families, things can go wrong, but there's a path to forgiveness and also reconciliation, repairing, restoring, whatever needs to happen to get us back to a really good place takes place. So again, I think in church community, if somebody has hurt me, it's my responsibility to let that person know, and hopefully together we can find resolution and understanding in a really safe way. Also, people not taking things personally, not being offended, all of those really mature life skills that no matter your age, some people have yet to grow into. Yeah. Whereas when we think about spiritual abuse and someone is being harmed, if I was to go to the person abusing me, most likely they're going to deny it. They're going to disregard it. And so whilst I have an invitation to forgive, reconciliation is often harder without that person acknowledging and admitting fault. And that's where we see, I think, a lot of the differences. And so my personal take is people should be in church communities where they feel safe and they are able to keep themselves safe. Because it's very hard if things are being continually done to you where there's no change. Everyone is going to have experienced church hurt at some point because we're human, like I've said. So someone could have offended you. You know, in some churches, somebody sits on your chair that you've been in for the last 25 years, and that's a really big deal. You know, whereas in other churches, somebody gets left out of a WhatsApp group, and again, they feel hurt. Yeah. But it's not been an intentional act of, I'm going to cause you harm and damage, and do those wrong things.
Yeah.
So, you know, we want to say that church is and church community is so vitally important for us as Christians. Like there's no two ways about that. Yeah. But with those who have been hurt by a church or individuals within it, you know, and they take the decision to step away from a life of church and attending church, you know, at all, you know, how do we either as individuals and church communities sort of work to connect and communicate with them?
Yeah, I think being and demonstrating love to that individual is really important, and not coming from a judgmental perspective of this is what you must do and this is what you should do. Because I work with some people and they have PTSD, and so for them, going into a church environment causes them to have a really negative response reaction. Some people are physically sick. Some people, they start having panic attacks, and it's to that extent. And so that's really, really hard. And so I think Christian community is really important. And for some people in certain seasons of their life, that is going to be grabbing a coffee in a coffee shop and talking about what they've read in their Bible this week. And for them, that could be church for a season. I'm someone who, I go to church regularly. I help lead and serve in my church. And so I definitely support and believe that the best place for Christians is in healthy church community. But I'm also really understanding that not everyone is there at that time. And so for those that are not, my response is, however you have fellowship. If it's online church, if it's on Zoom, if it's, walking in the park and praying with other Christians, to me, that's okay. And we look at the biblical model of church, and they met in people's homes. Yeah, they fellowshipped together. That's what the most important thing is, because you can go to a church building and actually not be part of the community and not be listening and not be partaking, but just ticking a box, which I don't think is the best way to do it.
Yeah. I suppose it's more damaging, well, not more damaging, but it serves no purpose to be, I don't know, self-righteous church, like the building, kind of, not that we can be the building, but sort of to say, oh, you have to come to church and that's the only way, because if this person is hurting and, really struggling, that's not being there for them, and that is probably more damaging by going, you're a terrible Christian because you're not coming to church.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think still loving them irregardless of the fact they've not been to church or they're not coming to your church and they are struggling is going to also be a really good example of a godly Christian. Yeah. Those things make a huge difference. And I mean, I was out of church for about 3 months and I felt really lost, and I was just like, I don't know what's happening. And I even questioned my own faith. And when I did go back into church community, it took me a while to really engage, to trust again, to feel like I belonged again, And so I went in with a big wall, a huge wall. And the leadership were really patient. And they didn't, as much as they might have noticed and observed that there were things about me that, would be of great service, they never forced me to serve and join a team and get super involved. They allowed me to go at my pace.
Yeah.
And so
I think that's really important. To be able to recognize that you need to take it slow is hard enough in itself, but to then have that reciprocated and have it appreciated that you are going to take it slow for a while. Yeah, that's so important. Yeah, but at the same time as gently, when the time comes, challenging that and helping you through that, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think a lot of people who go through spiritual abuse are often very gifted and very called, and they do love God and they want to serve God. And so I agree, again, at the right time, just encouraging them to do something. One of the most life-changing conversations I had with my new pastors when I did come out of the spiritually abusive church was, they took me out for coffee and they asked me, what can we do for you? How can we serve you? And I sat there kind of really confused because I'd never had a leader ask me that before. It's often, what can you do for us? Where would you like to serve? How many teams can you volunteer in? And so to hear it the other way really gave me a new understanding of servant leadership, where leaders are there to serve the people and to help and support. And so being able to have that role model to me then allowed me to more step back into leadership with confidence.
Yeah, we could talk about this for hours, I'm sure. For those who may right now be in a position where they are being abused, or for those who have been through hurt or abuse in the past, are there any resources that you would point them to as helpful places to deal with these things? Yeah,
absolutely. There's a lot of people who on social media who speak about spiritual abuse as well. And so I would say tentatively, do a search around spiritual abuse. However, there are some in the community who are still hurting and quite bitter. And so be mindful of some of the toxic messaging. I run a Let's Talk event. It's a free event every 2 months just to give people space to talk about it, to hear other stories, to ask questions, to get a little bit of understanding about it. So that's a resource, I would say, that can help people. And there are quite a few books written on the topic. So to educate yourself around it is helpful because you may not have language for what you've been through. So those things can be really helpful.
Yeah, and we'll put some links to those in the show notes. Yeah.
Well, so thank you so much, Francesca, for being here. It's been really, really interesting, sort of being able to talk about it in a safe space and kind of be able to ask those questions. Where can people find you online, and how can our listeners find your book?
Yeah, thank you. It's been great to have this conversation as well. So I am on Instagram and Facebook. So the handle is at ssa.restart. So SSA stands for Surviving Spiritual Abuse. And then the Restart is the name of the program that I run. And my book is called Surviving Spiritual Abuse, Hope, Healing and Restoration for Those Who've Experienced Hurt. And it's on Amazon.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.